Okay, yeah. I mean, everybody would put their names up
Katina.
there. Not that we don't know you guys' names already. Is everyone met everyone else? All three of you? You know one another? Or
No.
Okay.
No, actually, we saw each other last week, but we've never really talked. And the gentleman I know was in here last week también, ¿verdad? But igual we haven't had a chance to talk.
Well, Ed Santiesteban, former engineer with ASARCO, 35 years total. And engineering was my department. I did a lot of in-house design work for the plant and other plants. So we dealt with all kinds of engineering facilities disciplines, you know. So.
And Jose, you want to introduce yourself? What your connection is with the plant?
Jose Manuel Escobedo. Back between 2004 and 2009, I was doing a whole lot of door knocking. We were organizing the communities. And in one of those door knocks, I found Daniel Arellano. He connected me with like Charlie and with Efren and Chewy. And we saw this group of workers as an important part in this process that ASARCO was going through to try to get its air permit renewed. We wanted to make sure and elevate the concerns that this group of workers had and connect them with the concerns that the UTEP students had and connect them with the concerns that the neighbors had there around Sunset Heights specifically. And that was back under the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. And so for me and the group of people that I was working with, we saw this as an environmental justice issue, as a health issue, and we worked together primarily to prevent the smelter from getting its air permit renewed, and also to get the properties there around the Sunset Heights smelter to get cleaned up. That was my participation.
I don't want to contradict you on that, but in 2008 and 2009, I was called in back by ASARCO to do an engineering study, what it would cost to reopen the smelter.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of research on that, and it turned out that it was going to be very expensive, you know, to do all this. But all the environmental issues were being discussed, you know, through the legal department and all that. So a lot of improvements were already made, you know, through the modernization projects that we did in the early 80s. And the ASARCO smelter was one of the cleanest smelter in the world. Besides being built, you know, in the old days, 2 or 3 miles away from the downtown, but then the town grew and the smelter wound up being in the middle of town. So how do you comply with that? And then one of the disadvantages is smelting copper, you have sulfur as a byproduct. And sulfur doesn't hurt you. The people think it does, but it doesn't. You compare sulfur and hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is rotten eggs that's put out by the catalytic converters of all the automobiles that are being driven up and down the highways. And unfortunately, it has a bad smell, rotten eggs. So anyway, getting off of that, you know, everything was going to be good for the town, the economy, and so forth. It would have brought in a lot of employment, and the economy would have grown nationwide and international. Yeah. But the cost that we come up with was a little under $1 billion. And we were told, scrap it. I mean, we fought tooth and nail. We got a permit for the ore handling. We got a permit for the acid. And the only drawback was the expense. But it would take, we would have had to build, demo 2 acid plants and build 1 acid plant in one. And that would have cost a lot of money. Plus, being a 110-year-old smelter, it was a rust bucket. So what do you do with a rust bucket? You demo the equipment and replace it. and that costs a lot of money. So it was cut off at the same time ASARCO was going through a bankruptcy. That was one of the biggest things that we're dealing with. It wasn't just El Paso, it was nationwide.
Right.
You had the Glover plant, you had East Helena, Montana, the Latville plant in Colorado. So there's a lot of issues in there. So all that, had to stop somewhere.
Well, I'm just going to take the liberty, since we're few here and you're new, of asking you the question that I think it was Bill Addington of the Sierra Club asked, or the point that he made about the decision by ASARCO to not to reopen in 2008 or 9, I think it was. He said that it was because of the EPA changing hands, and his argument was that ASARCO was worried what the new EPA under Obama and the federal level would do. Do you think that had an influence, or what's your take on it from the inside?
I think they lowered the standards on the EPA, the parts per million that they were putting out, or we were putting out, It's like saying 1 part per million in a cubic centimeter. That's a lot, You're talking about one little dot in a cubic centimeter. That's quite a bit. It's hard to comply with stuff like that. And we had the best modern equipment that we have ever used in the plant. The only problem is when we would have shutdowns, like emergency equipment went down for some reason, power went out. Of course, you have opacity, smoke that comes up, and you're going to get the smell of sulfur. Sulfur, like I said, that's a byproduct of smelting copper. What's a byproduct when you cook bacon? Let me ask this question. Huh? How do you? Okay. I don't want to pick on none of you guys, but
you get smoke, right?
Okay, you can put a beautiful, huge hood on a kitchen, and you can start grilling your bacon. How do you keep bacon from spreading all over the house? You don't. The ozones take care of that. Unfortunately, the same thing goes with the smelting of copper. You have every matter of material has an odor. You gotta give it time, and with time it'll go away. One of the things that I can say is the years that I worked there, if I missed 3 weeks in those 35 years I was with a plant, would have been a lot. Missing being ill. The only time I would get sick is when I would go on vacation. That's just funny, isn't it? And when I would come back to the plant, automatically my body starts rejuvenating. I start getting stronger, and I didn't get sick. We all suffered with the smoke, the SO2, SO4. That creates acid. It's like when you perspire, if you have this SO3 out in the air as dust, it turns into acid. You walk through a smoky area where there's a lot of SO3, your tears turn into acid too.
But SO3 is very dangerous to the
But it doesn't hurt you.
But in the brain, yes.
Oh, we should introduce ourselves too, since I don't know that you've met my coworkers here. Maybe you want to introduce yourself.
My name is Edna Rico. I work for the University of Juarez.
Okay.
And I have been working and doing some research for my PhD in Avalos, Chihuahua. I'm a chemist and MD. Okay.
And I'm Froilan Enciso. I'm a PhD student at the same university where Chris Sellers works, Stony Brook University. And my area of specialty is drugs, drug dealing in Mexico.
Drugs.
Yeah, drugs in Mexico. Yeah, and Chris invited me to help in this project, so that's why I'm here, just to help. And Katie, you haven't introduced yourself.
We're waiting for you.
I'm from Chihuahua, Avalos. I didn't work in the plant or anything. I grew up there. My whole family grew up in Mexico with the ASARCO. I mean, all the way from ASARCO, Durango.
See. Well, I've driven through the Now, this is decades and decades ago. They smelter, the one going into Chihuahua. And that's not the Avalos, is it?
No, Avalos was away from Chihuahua. I think Chihuahua's grown up to
What
Avalos.
about the one that was close to Chihuahua as you're going into it? There used to be a smelter.
That is Avalos. That is Avalos. You see it at Chihuahua? Yeah, it's right. It's on the edge.
Okay, all right. You know, Avalos had the same blast furnace that we had here. The same type of blast furnace.
Yeah, this is the kind of,
Water cooled. We used blast air. We used blast air that was produced in the power plant, for blowing. It was a high volume, low pressure, and that would blow into the tweers that they had there. And the tweers, they would had a natural gas injected in there to mix with the blasting material. So that would create agitation inside the furnace. And then the furnaces, they were charged from the top. They had those hoppers up there. And they had a flue right through the middle of the blast furnaces. They would suck in the gases and they would convey it to the bag houses where they had bags made out of Dacron, and they would filter it. And people think that that's something that was invented yesterday. No, that thing goes back in time,
the bag house?
The bag houses. And then we had the Catrels, the electrostatic precipitators. The Catrels were electrically charged. The gases would be sucked in through the bag house first, which is a filter, just like a vacuum cleaner. And then it would go into the Catrels, which had corrugated plates. These corrugated plates, they had the wires strung down with counterweights at the bottom. And they would run the gases through there. And all the metal was electrically charged, and they would discharge into a collecting hopper. And that hopper had a conveyor belt, sort of like a screw conveyor or a drag conveyor. So that material that they recovered as impurities, they would reprocess that through the system again.
So the control, okay, you brought this up. I want to ask you this. I understand the control precipitator, I've looked into the
electrostatic precipitators.
That the reason, at least given in the papers for this, was because of the pollution and to cut back on the pollution.
Well, pollution is there, no matter what. When you're smelting, you're gonna have opacity, airborne fugitives, dust, smoke, and all that. It's hard to capture everything, But the major part, you recover that.
And that was one of the principles of the control precipitator.
Yeah.
Was there one in Avalos?
I can't speak for Avalos.
I haven't been able to find record of it or people who remember it.
I donated all the drawings, majority to UTAP's library. And
Drawings of El Paso.
El Paso, and also the museum in Zacatón in Arizona.
Right,
there.
okay.
They have all these drawings on the blast furnaces and all that.
Do they have the drawings of Avalos here?
I can't say that.
Avalos, when they went into the zinc, is when they remodeled a lot of it.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing is, the blast furnaces were identical what Avalos was using in here. I think Avalos goes further. It's older than the El Paso smelter. Much older.
And Monterey's the oldest, because that was the first plant.
That design was just duplicated, throughout different plants and all that. The same thing goes in East Helena, Montana. They had blast furnaces over there. They were doing the smelting for the lead. And then you have Leadville in Colorado was the same thing. So all that, it was lead. But the thing about lead is you have a lot of impurities. You have silver, nickel. You have zinc, cadmium. All that is in the impurities. All that has to be extracted.
Well, I think we've already started to broach the Avalos case, what went on there. And so I wanted to start now with, now that we've heard a little bit from you, Ed, some description about what has happened with us in Avalos. This is a series of seminars coordinated with a similar group in Avalos. And so just this past Saturday, we had a similar meeting to the one that you guys were at the previous Saturday. And so I wanted to give you a little report about what happened. I think it was quite different in tone and and sort of composition of people, but also
when you had Jorge Villalobos here, he's a metallurgist.
Well, I think
he's a baker. You know,
I'm thinking about the one in Avalos.
Oh, in Avalos.
As compared to the one we had
Here.
That you know, unfortunately you were not there for good reason. But let me just tell you a little bit about that, and I have some clips about what happened. Well, we had our initial speakers. You remember we did this exercise where we had 4 people to talk a little bit at the first. It was a little bit more extensive, the initial speeches were, than here. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we had a whole lecture by our health expert who had done the lead studies of the soil around the plant. Right. And Luz Helena Salim. And so the dynamic, I think, was a little different too. Yeah. Once we got to the discussion, we had a good number of former workers in the plant, a couple of former managers or engineers, including Senor Rodriguez, and then on the other hand we had
researchers.
We had an ecologist, Arturo Limon, and we also had. And we also had 3 of the health scientists or environmental scientists who had done some of the studies for the government. And so after the CNEAM talk in particular, what unfolded in the discussion was a quite heated debate about whether or not the contamination was real, whether or not the workers in particular, we're talking about the Avalos session, so whether the workers in particular were in danger. And with many of the former workers as well as managers insisting that there was not that much danger for workers, that a lot of them were not sick, people lived long, and all this kind of thing. And of course, people
cases of lead poisoning here and there.
What?
Just a few cases of lead poisoning here and there.
Here and there. I mean, and they also talked about how when people were, they measured people's blood lead, and when that lead got up beyond a certain point, they would put them elsewhere.
Yeah, well, we did the same thing here in the smelter.
Yeah. So, and on the other hand, the people, Sanin and some of the other health scientists were arguing that their measurements had shown that the area around the smelter was extremely leaded, and she actually went into her charts with all, it was kind of a scientific presentation, and so
and the workers didn't like it, huh?
They didn't like it, and so there was. Let me just give you a little sense of what happened there, if I could find this right. Soto Rodriguez. Okay, this is the debate we had, and let's see, is the sound working here? Let me see.
You should connect that.
Oh, it's not connected. No wonder. Sorry. Now why isn't it working?
Not connected, please. Not connected.
Not connected. No, that's not the right one. The connection. Maybe I turned it in.
By the way, Vero, Arturo Limon sent.
He's a part of it?
Yeah,
He was part of it, and he told me to give his greetings and give you a hug. I'm gonna give you the hug later.
Thank you. He's wonderful. I haven't seen him in maybe 10 years.
Really?
Yeah, I have his books because he wrote a couple of school books on ecology.
Not just a couple. I think that he has like 20 books or
Probably
something.
by now, but back then it was less. Yeah.
Okay, so here they are, they're debating, and a lot of the debate, there's Oscar Rodriguez, and a lot of the debate is over, one of the things that happens, just to give you a sense of how heated the debate got, is that a lot of the workers were saying that they didn't get sick, and most of the people they knew were healthy and lived long, and so this woman, who is one of the scientist people, Ms. Rosario Delgado, she started talking about a worker family she knew where the worker had actually gotten cancer, lung cancer, I think it was, and then all the other people in the family.
All the family, the whole family.
And so this is the other manager guy, he comes over and he wants to talk with her. He actually stands up, walks all the way around the room, and wants to find out who this person was who actually got sick. And you're saying, is it this person? He's showing her the picture. Is it this person? I know this person, and they're not dead. They're still living. And so he wants to sort of refute her. All of this is kind of individual testimony. People remember this and that. But her memory that she was talking about contradicted what this guy believed. So you can see, we had to get him to sit down. Things got a little heated on this front.
I can imagine.
Yeah, you guys can probably imagine, given what happened here with all the debate. But so we had a lot of that. Now, we did have engagement with you guys tape, and we showed, after what went on, we showed like four segments from the seminar here. And it was a little bit awkward because the language, for one thing, and we didn't really have the video synced and so on. But we do have some video here and audio to give you some of the response, and I just wanted to start with that. The response to how they responded to the discussion here the previous Saturday. So we started off. I think I'm just going to play the audio because that's the clearest. I'll show you this fella who gives the first response is Mr. Soto. No, this is the same one. Sorry. Discussion after videos. This is immediately following the video. So this is us watching or listening to the sound of the video, and she's reading the translation and of what people said. And the first response comes from Jesus Soto, who is there in the corner, a former worker. And let me just get what he said. And I'm going to play in Spanish since most of you, I believe, know Spanish. And we don't have to really translate, do we? I mean, gosh, we have the translation ready. But I heard you.
I speak Spanish.
Yeah.
Very well.
Okay.
You understand everything, Kenny.
Okay, so let's just play this. And
Yo pienso que pues, en Estados Unidos hay más posibilidades de trabajo, mejor por eso ellos vieron encerrar la planta. O lo que veo es que son puros malos comentarios de lo que era la empresa, a lo que nosotros hemos pues, platicado, ¿verdad? Ella puede trabajar pues, en agricultura, mejores ingresos que aquí en Chihuahua. A lo mejor por eso pues, le tomamos tanto ese tipo de coraje y cerrar. No sé si también si por la cuestión de bueno, eso no es porque pues, querían arriesgar, pues no era esa cuestión económica para llevar el producto a volver a pulir. Pero también lo que estaba viendo es de que hicieran nueva tecnología o tenían nueva tecnología para menor trabajo y mayor productividad. Lo que sí, que la mayoría de la gente a lo mejor se acostumbró a estar trabajando pues pesado, ¿verdad? Y ya no quisieron, o sea, se quedó con ese tipo de ambiente. No puedo a trabajar pesado y no voy a producir lo que estaba produciendo. Como aquí cuando se puso la sintetizadora, decía, mucha gente comentaba de que iban a trabajar con quisiera trabajar con saco color blanco, que era overoles blancos, y trajo overoles blancos y salía uno peor de negro que la camisa de él.
anyway, did you guys get that, or some of it was kind of unclear?
It sounded to me like he was saying that perhaps there was more opposition to the smelter because the workers would have more options. So the economic opportunities here are so that you can complain or o sea que te cuesta menos quejarte porque tú puedes buscar por otro lado.
Yeah, that's basically the translation. Everybody, I don't need to go through that, I guess. So it's an argument that was the first to come up, and I think, I think, it was also, go ahead. You guys want to add something?
Maybe because we presented your segment, and they was really, really happy to hear that you had such wonderful memories of Avalos. And then we presented 3 segments that were really critical about the plant because of environmental and health issues.
And upset the workers.
And the first reaction they had was, all right, yeah, these Americans, they are complaining because they can have many other jobs. They can have better payment.
But
that was So
go ahead. So that was the first reaction. And I think
maybe do you have commentaries on this argument or anything to say?
When you go apply for a job, it doesn't matter where you go. It could be a mine, it could be a smelter, it could be a refinery, it could be a construction site. There's hazards on every job, and the laws in those days, back then, before the flood, there was no environmental issues back in those days. People just got a job and they worked. Unfortunately, the companies, they didn't have the expertise, the end results of some of the products that they were manufacturing until environmentally starts getting studies, what it's like the MSDS, you heard of that, right? Then
that's the sheet with all the hazards on it.
Right. In the old days they didn't have that. Yeah, there were some certain things that you cannot mess around with this chemical because it's bad for your skin or for your eyes or whatever. But things have changed. And some of the things that when you was hired in a job, they probably told this is a dangerous place, and we follow certain safety procedures that we like to practice, but a lot of them ignore those safety procedures. They just did what they wanted to do. Unfortunately, a lot of them got hurt. Some of them got sick because they weren't told. They didn't practice the hygiene that they were supposed to do. When you get dirty and everything, you're supposed to wash your hands clean before you go and consume any food that you take in. And then, of course, lead was one of the major products that existed back in those days. Lead was number one thing they used for everything. They used lead for the fuel that they used for gasoline. They used lead for soldering plumbing. They used lead for lead pipes. Lead for lead weights. They use lead for ballast for ships. So there's so many things involved on that. So you have to stop and think. Where do you draw the line on this? Of course, management is going to say, hey, if you like the job, you can work as long as you want. But if you don't like it, you're going to complain. There's the door.
No, I would take issue with. Was that Mr. Soto?
That was Mr. Soto.
Yeah, I would take issue with that. I think that here in El Paso and probably in many other places where ASARCO has an operation, probably the economic opportunities are as broad or as limited as they would be in Chihuahua or anywhere else. So I don't think that's a factor. What I'm curious about is the labor organizing that was happening there versus here. Like, I wonder how much of that culture, Ed, when I mean, obviously you bring that today, right? I mean, you have your arguments and you have your data and you make it and you present it. That was obviously part of what the workers grew up in ASARCO, to defend the plant, to defend themselves, their job. But at the same time, there was organizing, there was organizing that was happening in the plant, and I wonder how much of that contributed to the culture so that after the plant is shut down, that attitude to want to defend yourself, to want to continue to participate, to protect yourself is still around. I see that as an example of maybe why that is. The workers after 99 continue to do their organizing, but I don't have anything to compare it to because I don't know what it was like in Avalos.
It was great. I mean, you're not going to hear anyone put it down because as far as we were concerned, we grew up there. We went to school. They gave us, I didn't know what medical insurance was as long as I was there.
And how about the union organizing?
The union was really strong.
It was strong. And in fact, we heard for various reasons, not only did we hear more after the testimony from El Paso, not only did we hear more acknowledgement that the plant was dirty, that the work was dirty, and it was dangerous. And I could, one guy said, well, we weren't making cake, but there was also a good, because we were talking about the benefits, we also got onto that. We began to hear more sort of division between the workers and the manager people. And in fact, the union leader was arguing that a lot of the benefits that they did get came from union pressure. And we got the sense too that, it brought back, we didn't have any discussion actually here of unions. We heard from the ex-workers, but not a whole lot, looking back at the conversation, there was not a whole lot of mention of unions. But there was a lot, actually. Maybe it was a composition of the group there, too, where we had...
No, the unions are strong because they could call a strike and shut the whole plant down in no time. Just like that.
Was it the same here?
Yeah.
How many times did the steel workers go on strike here that you can remember it?
A bunch of times. It had to do with the contracts, that they would write. It probably went for, 5 years or 3 years, something like that. Things change, depending on the union stewards, and their rules of regulations that they had, There's always grievances on the many issues that the union raised on against the company because some of the practices, either they were fair or they were not unfair, So, it just... to me, I recall it was about every 5 years, from what I can remember.
I think they were saying it was every year that they renegotiated.
Well,
every 2 years.
Yeah,
So, okay.
yeah. I'm talking about the union rule book that they come up with, because I remember that it kind of spanned, within from 3 to 5 years or something like that, And conditions have always changed, And one of the biggest things that we had against the union is the workers, they were told to do different jobs that they were supposed to be compliant with, like a boilermaker, do boilermaker work, a carpenter work, and so forth. One of the issues that they would raise is if you had a timber and there was a piece of angle iron bolted on the timber, none of them wanted to touch it. The union workers would say, we don't want to do that because it's got an angle iron that belongs to the boilermaker. The carpenter said, no, we don't want to touch that because it belongs to the carpenter. There are so many issues. So what the company would do is they would go out for contracts. Outside contractors come and do the job. I'm just using that as an example. Or you wanted a handrail made out of pipe for safety. Well, the first thing, they'll raise issues, union grievance. No, we don't want to build that because that belongs to the iron worker. And then they said, no, it belongs to the pipe fitters. So where do you draw the line on that? Issues like that, we would get all the time.
Okay. You want to introduce yourself, sir?
Certainly. Yes, I'm Michael Wyatt.
Okay.
And I might have received a phone call from you or two.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't have a chance to get back to you. I was out of town all last week and just actually picked up your messages today and just got off work, so I would have been here earlier. I'm far from a labor historian, but my thinking about the union at ASARCO is that the original workers that populated that plant were mostly Mexican immigrants that came out of a revolutionary, what today would be far radical union society. I mean, labor protection is written into the new Mexican Constitution in a way that it was never in the American Constitution. We don't have anything referencing labor rights in our Constitution. Barely have it in most of our laws. But Mexican immigrants came from a society where it was revolutionary times, and they had very powerful industrial unions. And so I think that there was a more fertile seedbed in El Paso for industrial union organizing at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century than you would have seen in any other, American community. I mean, other communities had their Eastern European immigrants and things like that, where, I hate to use the term communist and socialist but that's what those unions were, and unabashedly and very, very strong among the communities that they represented. And I think that helped over time to create a strong union atmosphere in ASARCO that persisted when the other unions, industrial unions, the garment workers in El Paso were falling apart. Everything else across the country was falling apart, but there was always a very strong union ethic at ASARCO.
Okay, well, we need to move along to the.
But could you introduce yourself just to?
Oh, Michael, yeah. What's your background, your connection with the?
We already did that, but
with the smelter and the community issues
Yeah,
around.
I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing in El Paso for 25 years. When I first moved back from law school, I lived in Sunset Heights, which is less than a mile from the Stack. And in 1992, 3 and 4, they were undergoing an earlier iteration of their permit reapplication process, and I was involved at that time in fighting the permit application. And in fact, at that time, I approached the steelworkers and the other end of the steelworkers and whoever else I could at that time, because I was getting my butt kicked in the application fight, because they were going to have 2 weeks of hearings in Austin, and I was not going to be able to attend. So I was looking for, some kind of a benefit, and I wanted to reach out and ask, make a settlement offer that I would withdraw my my opposition to the permit if they would sign an agreement that they were going to use local union labor to do the new construction on site. And because the unions on site were so pro-company at that time, because the jobs, they wouldn't even give me the time of day to have the discussion about trying to use union workers to build a new contact procedure plan. But through the years, I had known a number of the workers, and then after that period of time, I went to work with the local legal aid office where Veronica works, and through that position, I also got involved in representing the local ACORN that Jose Manuel was organizing in the final permit renewal application that they ultimately lost or withdrew.
And was Joe Pignon your client in the first?
No, I didn't have a client. I was my only client. Joe Pignon was the only other contestant in the hearing, and I don't think his son Perry was licensed yet. I think Joe just went down to Austin on his own nickel and fought it by himself, because I couldn't do it. I was just barely trying to start my own law practice at that time. And but I've got a lot of respect for Joe for what he's been through the years.
Okay, well, back to Avalos. Let's look at a little more response.
Yeah, what we are doing now, we had a similar seminar in Avalos, Chihuahua. So we are listening part of the discussion we had there and trying to get some feedback from you.
So eventually, we're going to, very soon, we're going to get to their answers to some of your, this is actually responding to you guys' questions a little bit. And then we're going to their questions for you guys. So let's just look at, this is one more response, very brief, from Senor Rodriguez. Yeah, see.
En la planta del Paso, donde los jefes eran los americanos, la mayor parte los mexicanos, de modo que eso ya no podemos opinar allá porque no trabajamos allá. Ahora, en cuanto a los beneficios, indiscutiblemente que los beneficios que proporcionó la compañía, y claro, existía el sindicato, las cláusulas de...
That is, there's not much of a direct response, but what he did in the course of the discussion was to say, well, since I don't have experience with the El Paso plant, you know, I can't really compare. And so in a way we kind of lost the thread of comparison. But then later on, and I'll just summarize this story, that he told a story about his interactions with the people from El Paso. They came to look at his zinc plant in Chihuahua. He considered it his, yeah. Because it didn't build up the kind of accretions inside. Apparently these things were building up in the El Paso plant, but they weren't building up in the Chihuahua plant. And so he was kind of proud of demonstrating how he had really, with his use of particularly the bunker oil fuel, he was able to avoid that problem that they had faced. So the implication being that they kind of figured out the technology in Chihuahua better so that it caused less of a mess than in El Paso. And so therefore, you know, that helps explain, I think, and he was sort of saying that helps explain why people were so upset over the pollution in El Paso, but not in Chihuahua.
Let me ask a question. You mentioned zinc plant. Okay. When was that built in Chihuahua?
1952, I think, is when it opened.
Okay. In 1950, Sarco built the zinc plant in El Paso.
Ah.
So just to give you a little bit of information on that. The zinc plant is a byproduct of lead slag. So that has to be fumed in order to come up with a product. They fume it. And in fuming it, it comes in a dust form. And the dust form is a material that it was used back in those days to make the grills on cars and everything. You know, before polymers were invented, you know, I'm talking about plastic. The grills were made out of zinc and pot metal, you know, and then they would use nickel to chrome it and so forth. That was one of the things. And then also the zinc. They had two types of zincs, you know. They had technical and commercial. Okay, the technical was used for pharmaceutical use, you know. And that was used for food processing. They used to use the zinc tin cans. They would line them inside with that. That was a product that they used for that. And then, of course, the zinc, the commercial zinc, that was used for making bearings and what you call babbitt on bearings, you know, for industrial equipment, big fans and everything, where they can't use ball bearings because they get deteriorated, they get abrasive, and they wear out. So babbitt is a material that comes out of zinc and lead. And that material is still being used for huge equipment and industrial.
So the zinc plant in El Paso, how long did it run?
We ran that one from 1950. That's when they built it, and we shut it down in the late part of the 90s.
Okay, so
right? It wasn't like 89, 88, something like that.
Okay.
They shut it down. So.
What is your reaction to his sort of implication that the El Paso engineers somehow use technology, use fuel, and so on in a way that was dirtier than...
Well, to run a zinc plant, you have to bring in coal. And coal has to be crushed into a powdered form. And then you use coal pulverizers that it has a huge ball bearings inside that they rotate, you know, and it pulverizes the coal. Of course, coal is dirtier than hell, you know. That's a filthy fuel. You know, it's a fossil fuel, but it burns beautiful when you mix it with oxygen. You know, that thing, you have some combustion going in there. So, you know.
But in terms of the relative skills, I guess, and techniques of the engineers in these two places, do you have a sense of that, or?
Well, okay, let's get into the engineering. The zinc plant in El Paso.
Not too much, but just.
Yeah, no. It was designed by Stern Rogers.
Okay.
You know, that was the company that did the engineering and everything. You know, so if you're looking for those Stern Rogers drawings, you're gonna find them in Zacatón in Arizona, that museum up there. That's where they have the drawings. So.
Okay, so we could put that together. Other responses to that? We can go.
I'm curious if you had like joint trainings or the engineers in Avalos. Did you mix with the engineers here? And
we communicated off and on. You know, they would call for problems that they were running into. You know, technically or whatever, and we would look into it. And then if we had a similar problem, we would. Give them a feedback and said, this is what we did, you know, we changed it a little bit and so forth. And a lot of the equipment that was purchased through industry, some of the equipment didn't last very long. So as far as our engineering background, we would go and study the equipment and we would make it stronger. We would modify it, retrofit the thing. And then later on, the factory reps would come over and say, you haven't ordered any parts from us. We didn't tell them that we modified their equipment. We made it better. We found the flaws on it and we improved on them. So that information was shared between the plants in Mexico and the U.S. You know, we shared a lot of information like that.
They also sent the workers up from Avalos. I know my dad came up here to work, to train. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of the workers down here were sent up here. Mm-hmm. So.
And the workers here would go over there?
No. I don't think so.
No, they hardly did that, you know. It was a union thing.
Yeah.
Union thing?
Yes.
But the exchange can only go one.
Well,
these were engineers.
Okay. The thing is, there's always counter, how can I say it?
Immigration problems.
Right. You know, it's just, they didn't want to mix that, you know, it's just a legal thing, you know, that they didn't want to get into.
Was part of this, they talk about enladrillamiento, like putting bricks together, or making some part of an industrial process in the zinc plant stronger with bricks.
No, we don't use brick in the zinc plant.
No?
It was
what
water.
Do you use?
We used water-cooled jackets.
But this was part of the jacket, I think you were saying.
We used the water-cooled jackets, and we had heat sinkers. The heat sinkers are studs that are welded in the inside of the furnace. You know, they're welded like every square inch. You know, what that does is when they fired up the furnace, of course, you're pouring in the return slag that's coming out of the lead plant. You know, and what that would do, it would build up a slag film across the inside. And that would be the protective skin of the water-cooled jacket. Once that thing is done, then they just start smelting the slag, you know, that was coming out of the lead processing plant. And then, of course, the slag, the zinc, it was fumed, you know. We had waste heat boilers that would pick up all the gases, and the gases, they would recover all the impurities. Like I was telling you before, it would collect it into a hopper. Everything was reprocessed, and all that was mixed with the powdered ice coal and the zinc fume material that they used on that. After they were done, then they would make in those ingots. They would make powdered zinc, and they had ingots on that too, zinc bars.
And last question about that. What was the brick crew?
Say this again?
Bricks crew.
The brick crew.
Brick crew.
We had a question from the
brick
last time. So one of the
Oh, the masons. Oh, well, the masons. Okay, the blast furnace. Okay, the lower section of the blast furnace is made out of. They call it. Let me see. How can I put that? Heat-resistant plate. You know, you heard of firebox plate? Okay, firebox plate in the ASTM code is called 285C, which is a temperature resistance, abrasion resistance material. That material is used to manufacture those water tank jackets. Water tank jackets like jackets on an engine, you know. That thing you have running water through the system. That water keeps them cool and keeps them from burning. Then, like I said before, in the inside of the furnaces, they would weld on studs, you know, they call them heat sinkers, to absorb the heat out of the furnace, and it would convey it through the water, and the water would send out to the cooling ponds, and then it was just a recycle thing. That's how they would use that. Now, the brake part was above the crucible, which is a structural beam, double channels, rivet and everything. They had brakes. It was a part of the shaft, you know. That's where the material was being stored in there. So that's what the masons worked on, you know.
So Mario, who was here last time, Nevarez was a mason, and when we were dealing with the remediation of the historical site, just, you know, I think last year we had a big discussion about the bricks because we thought some of them were contaminated by PCBs and some by chromium-6. So we convinced the trustee to not sell them, and they're going to be buried on site as part of the landfills.
Okay.
But there were a lot of bricks that were part of the different, like the reverb furnace, I think, also had bricks. The reverb furnace?
The reverb, we use a silica brick.
But there are different types of bricks.
It's a different material. The silica brick is rated for 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's for high temperature. And it's strictly an insulation, you know, for the furnace. What protects the furnace brick is the jackets that are on the outside of the furnace. You know, they would have copper jackets with water-cooled coils in it. And then they would wrap the fire brick, which is the silica brick, on the inside of the furnace. And usually it was like 8 to 18 inches, you know, thick. So all that heat that's inside the furnace is radiating into the brick furnace. And then you have the copper jacket that picks up all the heat, and it conveys that hot water, takes it out to the cooling ponds.
Okay, so I think we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to maybe taking the liberty of cutting people off and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I wanted to get to their questions for you guys and spend some time with this because, let me just say one other answer that I think was to a pressing question for many people who are not here this time, maybe, but has to do with the hazardous waste there, whether they burned hazardous waste. And we didn't get any message that they did in the terms that happened here, but one guy remembered in the 80s that they drove up some, what was it, donkeys and some trucks. It was trucks, camiones with jalapenos.
Jalapeno
cans. In cans, metal cans, and burned the whole thing in the zinc plant. They just threw it in there. So it suggests there was there as well a little, sometimes a casual use of the furnace for other things than smelting, what it was designed to do. So I know you weren't here with all the questions about the hazardous waste, but you're certainly familiar.
That's why we had the environmental department.
Right.
You know, I didn't get involved with them. My job was the in-house maintenance, keeping the equipment running, keep it upgraded and improve it as we went and so forth. But I hardly got into the environmental issue because there wasn't.
Even prior to when we think that Encycle was sending things to El Paso, Encycle was known to take materials from us with DEA and even local manufacturers and dispose of them through the reverb or through other locations, other furnaces at the site. I'm not sure if that happened.
Yeah, that one story suggests that it did.
It was
1985. 1985.
Guns, because that's what I think they were confiscating, at the border, and then they were burning.
Oh, the DEA.
Yeah, we were the what they call it?
It's an official capacity.
I mean, everybody used to agitate the DEAs and all these federal guys because when we had a spoon which was picked up by the converter crane, and they would confiscate things that the government has, counterfeit guns, clothing, boots, watches, you name it, they would burn them. And then when they would bring in pot, there was a reaction on the furnace because it's a cold charge. You heard of the saying, when you don't throw cold beans on a hot skillet? You've heard of that? It reacts. It explodes. So when you put a charge on a furnace like that, the first thing that it's going to smoke, we have all these viewports on the walls of the furnace. That thing was just like a dragon. And the guys were out there just real happy breathing it.
Okay.
I mean, they're supposed to wear respirators, but, they say, hey, I'm going to get a high legally.
Okay, we have to move on to questions.
It happened.
One of the things, there are a couple of them actually wrote this as a question, and they're real curious about why the chimney was brought down. So I know there were lots of stories, but anybody want to summarize the explanation? Why did they tear the chimney down? Everybody knows about this in Avalos. They brought the chimney down.
Are you familiar with sulfuric, what do you call it, Spalding concrete?
No, I'm not, but I thought this was is it a technical issue or?
No, okay. Have you looked at concrete slabs? And you have an area that's real heavily in alkalite. Have you seen how it deteriorates the concrete? It spalls out. It disintegrates. So here's a big issue for us, I didn't get involved with it because this Project Navigators thing, but I did consult them on a lot of things when I was still working, doing some work for them. We had two huge acid plants next to the 800-foot stack, all right? Then we had a center plant where the lead stack was built. Guess what you get out of the center plant? You get black acid. Black acid is higher in percent than zinc, than the copper acid. Copper is 93%, lead is 98%.
We're running out of time. Could you bring that back to the chimney?
Okay.
Yeah, well, it deteriorates the concrete.
Okay.
So it destroys the integrity of the structure itself, the infrastructure.
But what is the chemical name for black acid?
It's just lead. It's lead.
Lead? Or is that sulfuric?
That's a byproduct of lead.
But why was the decision made? And this was a political decision, not a technical decision. They asked this is the way that one of them put it. Why did they not leave it up as a memorial to the plant and the history of the plant?
When you have the structures that are getting deteriorated through the process of smelting due to the acid contaminated areas, that structure, that foundation is not as sound as it looks. You can take a core sample anywhere and you get a good sample and say, hey, this sounds good. But what about the area that you cannot touch, like the foundations?
So the foundation was very weak and corrupt.
One of the biggest issues, enemies.
Okay, we have another opinion here.
I was involved in the effort to try to save the stacks, and we paid $50,000 to an engineering firm to send 3 guys up there with hammers and rappel down, and every 10 feet, check the density of the concrete and everything, and it was sound, and we had engineering reports on the foundation, and the reason it came down principally was a lack of vision or community support of keeping it up, which would have created an ounce of liability that would have to be absorbed by somebody. And
having the structure still up there that would create
someday it's going to come down either by an act of God or by destruction. Who's going to take responsibility for it? And Project Navigator put some fairly hard to meet restrictions on who it would allow to become the recipient, the owner in the future. In the city of El Paso, UTAB, various entities were in discussions but the whole discussion got truncated by the time demands of the schedule. He wanted to have it buried on site by a certain date so that they could start putting the top on the entire site. And we just ran out of time in trying to meet our opinion is we met all of the requirements that he had placed on us, but they kept moving the goalposts. And I think it was just a lack of vision. He didn't have the ability to see that this could ever be an economically interesting or community-supported monument or anything valuable to the community. So, and frankly, there wasn't a big community swelling of support either. So it was just easier to take it down than to have the discussion.
And there's an issue too.
There were environmental questions,
Right, the marketability of the site. I mean, the trustees' obligation is to sell the property, and what he would say publicly was that it was an easier future sale if the stack was not in the way.
He had no data to support that kind of. I mean, he was making that up because it was easier to tear it down. There's a lot of economically viable uses for that stack, including just being a monument to the workers, which was our position. But so he did have a lot of arguments that were not, I don't think, founded in any sort of evidence.
I don't.
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't think it was a political decision. I think it was more an economic decision than anything. It did seem to me that the political establishment here, those leaders, I think we're all aligning with what Michael is saying. I think that probably the community did see some dissonance there, where at first a lot of people were saying, no, you close the thing, contamination, and then for another group to say, well, you know what, yes, but leave the smokestacks up, might have created kind of some cognitive dissonance there, and maybe that's why we didn't see that groundswell that we saw, for example, when the permit was coming up.
Where do they get this $14 million to maintain? I'll be honest with you, we didn't spend a dime in keeping up the stack at all. The only problem that we were very concerned is the acid that has percolated into the soil, because there's a lot of sand and dirt. What that does is it heaves up foundations big time. And acid and sand doesn't mix. It's like hydraulic action. Just like water when it freezes in the hose bib, it breaks steel. It breaks brass. It's so strong that it just breaks anything. And this is one of the issues that they were contemplating on. And of course, when I started to work there in 1969, once a month we used to survey the stacks. We had 4-inch pipes all the way down to the footings, and it would take a lot, and we would take elevations on that, see if there's any settlement on that. Guess what? The 800-foot stack never settled. It was heaving up. It was rising. From the original time that it was built in 1966 to 99, that thing has raised about almost 12 inches. A lot of people don't know that.
What happened to the slag though?
Huh?
What happened to the slag though?
It's still there.
To me, that's more dangerous than
Well, you've got iron slag. You have a small percent of copper in it. I don't know. I mean, I didn't get involved with that. So I'm sure they're going to crush it and sell it. Right now, what's the name? Rio Tinto, the group, the family, Ayups. They're the ones that buy some of this impurities because they have a customer. China.
Okay, let me just, a couple more questions.
Real quick on this, when the stacks came down, I think that it was clear that the trustee didn't do a lot of work, I guess, there are issues that happened with the way the stacks came down. And there were some pretty horrific pictures of the stacks coming down, and of Juarez especially getting one last huge dose of pollution from the stack. So
Okay, let's, we have very little time left, but I do want to get, at least address a couple more questions. What happened to the workers after the plant shut down? This is from someone who also notes that there was, when it shut down in Chihuahua, that a lot of the workers remained underemployed or unemployed. And so was that the same in...
The same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I got laid off, after, 99. So I had to go look for some work. I had to go start doing some freelancing, which I did. I lucked out. I got a job with NASA, designed a hydraulic test stand for the orbiter space shuttle for them. They used it. It was something that was designed in the late 50s and early 60s, so I got to work on that. And they have it now at the White Sands testing facilities. As one of the things that they wanted was anyway, that was one of them. Anyway, that's it. I did all kinds of jobs.
Well, okay. The one other question, this is a big one, but maybe we can answer it a little bit. What environmental measures were considered and applied during the plant's operation, and when did each of them start? One of the things I think for me is looking at the chimneys and the difference in the chimneys. And that one in Avalos is only 328 feet high.
That's short.
That's short. But they talk about, this is a way to avoid pollution. So, and I think it even goes back to the 40s or 30s, that chimney.
Well, the only reason
what were the technologies and other environmental measures? Just in brief, if you could summarize.
They had short stacks on the lead department. The last stack they had was 225 foot. It was octagon shape, brick, all the way
that
to
was
the
for
top.
the lid.
It was for the lid. But in 1950, right after the Second World War, they decided to improve the plant's production. And the blast furnaces, they were being the smoke or the gases that were being conveyed from the furnace. They run up through the catrels and everything, but that 225 foot stack was not tall enough. It couldn't handle the CFM. And that thing, they had to use a forced fan to be able to bring it out. But there again, they had the opacity elevation that they had to reach in order to dissipate some of the gases. So they built a 610 foot stack to be able to handle that.
For the lid.
For the lid. So that was one reason they built that stack in 1950.
But they didn't do that for Avalos.
Well, I don't know what Avalos did, That's another... You may answer that?
Yeah.
No.
We don't have...
It put out a lot of sulfur.
Put out a lot of...
And then the copper stack, we used to have a 400 brick stack. That was built in 1917. And make the story short on that one, the same thing. They increased production. Before they built the revert, they used to have copper blast furnaces They had lead blast furnaces and copper blast furnaces. So that was very different. But then they decided to build reverberatory furnaces right at the turn of the century, which is a 25 by 125 feet long. That thing can handle more tonnage of molten copper, so copper started to be a demand back then, you know. So anyway, they had to build a bigger stack, and they used to call that brick flue, the R&R flue, which was a reverb and a wedge roaster's flue. So in 1966, when they built up the 828-foot stack, that one was the same thing, you know. It carried the fugitive smokes and opacity. It flew all the way up to the lower valley and so forth, you know. Phelps Dodge and a joint venture, they did a pilot plant, acid. They did a study there in the Sarco property to design an acid plant. So they came out with a number one acid plant that was built in 1970.
That was a response too. I understand.
Yeah, that was
the acid plant was.
It was part of the emission, and that really it really cured the problem there. I mean, we weren't putting up as much smoke as we used to, so the gases that were being captured before it hit the stack, it went into a Cottrell, electrostatic precipitators, and then from there it went into the scrubbers, back scrubbers, and then it went into the precipitators, the lead, all that. So they start extracting a byproduct which is called sulfuric acid, which is 93%.
I don't think they had a sulfuric acid plant in.
No, we didn't. But our first customer was the Chevron refinery. Because you have to use sulfuric acid for refining gas.
Oh, so you got another byproduct you can
Yeah.
sell.
Now the refineries has another byproduct, which is called polymers, which is plastic. So this is where the Tupperware, all this plastic has come up with.
Okay, just one more wrap-up question. Do you think that in our Sarco's vision, as carried out in El Paso and Chihuahua, the human element, human needs, circumstances, the people involved, was not sufficiently considered? A little bit general a question, but you know.
I think the economic market threw a big monkey wrench on the copper, lead, everything, you know. The Asian countries stockpile copper like crazy, and they went and unloaded that into the international, and this is what brought the price down on copper, you know, and everything, and they shut down a lot of operations. They curtailed. They start cutting back. And before you know it, the whole United States is out of smelters, out of operations, and they reopen it up, you know, they start back again on it. But that did an impact on the economy, not just the U.S., but international-wise.
So what others of you have a feeling about this one?
The owners are humans too. Their needs were, I mean, the question should be whose needs were taken into consideration, not were the human needs taken into, because all of the decisions were to benefit a certain group of humans. And I think you could look at any decision that was made, and it was made with a very specific set of interests in mind.
I think that's right. You know, just last week in some of the interviews that were being done with the workers, I think one of the things that came out of that is just how insufficient a retirement package came out of the.
It sucked.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean that I think
out of the bankruptcy and so forth, or
well, no, there's the employees are protected through a government thing, you know, for retirement. But unfortunately, like here in '99. I got cut off. At that time, I was 55 years old. So my retirement was 50%. That's it.
55 years old.
And then, when I turned to Social Security benefits, they offset that. They cut me off 25%. So they leave me out cold. That sucks. It hurt, you know. So, you know, everybody went through that, not just hourly, but, you know, salary. Everybody went into that. They had to take a cut. So what's left? Go find a job.
You guys have other commentary on that? We have to quit. They're going to kick us out.
You're Katie. I think you had something to say about this thing and the human element.
The human element in this art.
My dad died in the colony in Avalos. He was 52 years old. My mother got a settlement from the company, period. It wasn't very big or anything, just enough to get us out of Chihuahua to El Paso. No retirement, no nothing.
What year was that?
About 55. 59, he died in 59. But he died in Mexico, so.
Is there anything you want to say to the guys in Avalos?
Anything else?
Anything else in general, like a year? Yeah, like yeah, we can record that and show you that. Is anything you want to say?
Yeah. No, I do. I miss them a lot. Growing up in Avalos was great. I don't care about the pollution. I don't care about anything else. It was fantastic. When we were little, we could do anything we wanted. Climb trees, drive a car, steal somebody's apples, you know.
Okay, well, I thank you for coming. And I know we had a different group this time, but I think we certainly filled the time with lots of interesting commentary and lots of stuff to bring back to the folks in Avalos. I think I want to get contact information from each of you so we can give you maybe a little report about the final situation in Avalos. And if you have any questions you want to write for them, any further questions, I think that feel free to take a card and write it after we've talked a little bit here. Okay?
You can also email us later on.
Do you have my email?
You can
yeah. So a lot of you do anyway. I don't know if Mr. Wyatt does.
I did a good one. Oh, you had hoppers, you had brick blues, you had water cooled jackets, and you had tweeters.
Okay, let me just.
That's your copy.
Okay. All right. They're really wanting us to get out of here in about 3